Though it turns out that story about the government halving sick days from 10 down to 5, those evil, meanie people, was fake news. Only problem with it, of course, is that it was spread by the Prime Minister himself in an interview on Monday. So what's going on here? David Seymour, the leader of the ACT Party, is with us from Parliament, and Chloe Swarbrick, co-leader of the Greens. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Hey, I thought we'd start with butter, because we've had lots of emails just in the last couple of minutes since we started talking about it. And I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but you'll have different views, but butter, Chloe, very expensive for people. One of the drivers of food price inflation that we saw yesterday. But isn't it also good because we're paying an export price and that's what our farmers are getting, that comes back to the country? Can you see both sides of it?
I mean, as with all things, of course you can see both sides of it, but at the end of the day, I think what people are concerned about is their ability to put food on the table. And that's why we need to be squarely focused on improving the cost of living for New Zealanders, whilst also rapidly reducing our climate changing emissions, which, you know, if we leave climate change unabated, farmers are those hit first and worst by climate change charged weather events. So that's why the Greens are really proud to have put our green budget on the table just last month to show people precisely how that is possible if we use our collective resources to realise our collective ambitions.
David, is the price of butter a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's both. It's obviously very good for New Zealand farmers to see that milk price up around $10. However, New Zealand consumers are paying that global price that the farmers are getting. Ultimately, it's not just butter, it's all the things people are trying to afford. How easily we can afford it depends on the strength of the New Zealand dollar, on our economy, and that's why it's so important that we have a government that's really focused on managing its own finances and affairs well, so that there's more for everybody else to use to provide for their own needs, and for everything from butter to clothing to getting around the town with petrol.
Sick leave, this was another issue this week that's popped up. Government not going to be cutting from 10 days down to 5 the sick leave. David, why not? Why do we need 10 days sick leave?
Well, it's an argument you can make that it should be 5. Other people would argue it should be 15. But the change that the government's making with Brooke van Velden as our Workplace Relations and Safety Minister is to ensure that it's prorated. And what that means at the moment, you could be someone that works part-time, say 1 day a week. So you only work 50 days a year, but you get 10 days off. That's 20% of your time as sick leave. The changes that Brooke will make it fairer, so that you get the same amount of days, about 10 days out of 250 or 4% of your time you can take off as sick, regardless of whether you work full-time or part-time.
Most people, Chloe, would think that's reasonable. Do you reckon?
I mean, if we want to be reasonable and evidence-based, then our starting point, I don't think, should be how do we cut this thing down. It should be looking at how we currently sit within kind of the middle of the stock when it comes to international metrics, and we would usually compare ourselves. But more so than that, the kind of starting question should be, how do we keep New Zealanders safe? How do we keep New Zealanders healthy and well? Because if we're talking about the economy in the broadest possible sense, then all that really is all of us, the things that we create, the rules that we put in place in order to try and govern those kinds of relationships. And I think that the starting point should be making sure that New Zealanders are fit, healthy and safe to be able to go to work, which in turn has flow-on effects for our productivity and for the so-called growth that this government says it's fixated upon. So the starting point should not be cutting those sick days. I heard from a number of constituents, particularly parents, who are really alarmed by the news about the potential cuts, whether it's half or just less than that. But again, the starting point should not be cuts. The starting point should be fairness.
There are no cuts being made. What is happening is that you get the same amount of sick leave, but it's proportional to the amount of time that you actually work.
Yeah, which I think makes sense. I think most people get that.
One day a week, you need 1 day off. If you're sick for a week and you work 5 days, you need 5 days off. That's fair.
Yeah, fair enough. Hey, Chloe, just talking about health, because the ministry has put, have you seen the Herald this morning? Probably not if you're in Wellington, but they've put these ads everywhere. Advertising the fact that all of the targets, or most of the targets that the government set for the ministry, are actually starting to improve. Shorter waits for elective treatment, shorter stays in emergency departments, faster cancer treatments, childhood immunisations, shorter waits for first specialist assessments. Why is this government making progress in places that the last one couldn't?
Well, first things first, I'd say I haven't seen that, so we'd need to look into the detail of it. And as I think both you and I could agree on, the fact that data and the presentation of stats can often end up being presented in a way that is beneficial.
You just said you haven't seen them, but you're going to tell them anyway.
Well, no, I was saying that I haven't seen them, but I'd like to see them, and then I'd like to dig into the detail that sits behind them. But more than that, Ryan, look, you only need to have had an experience with our emergency departments in winter to see that things are falling apart. And here, I don't want to lay the responsibility only at the feet of this current government. It is decades of systemic underfunding from successive governments that has resulted in the healthcare crisis that we are currently experiencing at the front line. And we can fix that, but we have to fix that with sensible, common sense investment, which means a fairer tax system and us having more rational conversations about what we take on debt for, like investing in our infrastructure, as opposed to the tax cuts that this government's decided to borrow for.
David, I can see the restraint in your eyes. You guys, I have to say, on the whole, have both been really well behaved this morning. I'm kind of surprised at how this has gone.
Well, it's our first run, mate.
I mean, Chloe's digging herself her own hole, so I don't need to get involved, but can we just put a bit of perspective around
There it is.
I mean, 2017, Labor and the Greens get into government. The health budget's $18 billion. 6 years later, they're out of government. The health budget is $30 billion. They
Global
went up,
pandemic along the way.
That came and went within that period. It was actually higher for a little bit, then it got to 30 by the end of the 6 years. Now, in that period, they put up the spending by 66%, way more than population, way more than inflation, and managed to get worse results through mismanagement. What we're now doing is we are increasing the budget. We've increased it by about another $2 billion since we've been in power. But we're also saying, how do we get value out of that massive increase in spending? And the objection I have to the Greens and their budget is that, they say that throwing money at every problem is the solution. Actually, we've tried that. They've actually proved it didn't work, and now they're promising to do it more.
I want to be crystal clear that throwing money at the problem alone, Ryan, is not actually the solution here.
It's your whole budget.
Growing our real-world economic capacity and actually planning our economy is the solution here, and the Greens have shown from an evidence-based way that we can do that.
Okay,
we have to
you go. That's what happened.
Okay. I look forward to doing this all again next week, guys.
I tried, mate.
And